This marriage had started out as a long-term relationship, and all he desired was her, Lacey, who knew of his lies. But what made her heart beat so hard? It all started the moment she was asked to give up. Lacey was a major star in a secret organization that had been flawlessly playing roles for clients for the past 12 years. She was close to freedom, becoming a fugitive in the blink of an eye, and not even tears could bear all the weight of that burden. Once on the ship, Lacey was discovered to be a stowaway, causing a stir. But of all places, the heroine met him here. However, judging by the man's reaction, he was only happy to see her face. His name was Halid Sirim Hartman, a prince of the Irina Empire, who was visiting the Weldon Kingdom for trading purposes. However, Lacey had already heard that he had managed to sign a trade agreement. She was sure that Halid would turn her in to strengthen ties with Weldon, but his interest was growing, for he wished the girl to play a different role for him. Who knew it would turn out this way? As long as the fugitive was fairly compensated, she would be able to do anything, though that didn't discourage him in the slightest. Halid wished the stranger to be the bride he had fallen in love with at first sight. And it was very strange, for it was unclear what the man intended, but the prince gave her a choice. In the end, he heard consent on her part, and now they were going to raise the sails immediately. That was how their marriage began. Everything was ready for their return to Irina. However, there was something that needed to be finalized, namely to seal the new union. Veronica Hillsdale was summoned to a trial where she was promised to be executed. The judge asked the sinner for the last word, eyeing her like a predator. What was she supposed to say? Was the rain washing away the weariness and tears from her sinful body? Could it be? Is a love a sin? She wanted only to love the prince, and constrained as she was, she admitted it without a shred of fear. She remained impenetrable to the very end, so that there were whispers and exclamations all around. It was madness. Even the count did not come to the trial. It must have been a shock to hear such a thing from his daughter. The judge ordered this woman, who still kept wishing the prince to be happy, to be taken away. Except she would be much happier. After a while, she was ordered to hurry up and go inside. And yet her acting was excellent. The judge thought it was superb. And if both parties were happy, their contract was over, so the father had to pay. No, not the father, the buyer. Well, it was now known that Veronica Hillsdale had never existed. The girl didn't even know who her daddy even was. She had once been sold to Hung Sin-so, and this happened when she was only 10. The girl was met by a madam who thought she was nice enough, and she would only get better with age. Lacey was good at many things, so she asked the woman to see her as much more than just an attractive face. And that only amused her. She even got a question out of her, according to which the girl knew what funhouse was. Her first role was a random passerby who witnessed a crime. From now on, the protagonist became an actor, and her no matter what role it is, she will be obliged to play. The heir who thought he was dead, the groom's new hidden child, the Marcus's youngest maid. Still, her skills were exceptional. There were a lot of poison worm and body collector in the excitement center. The actress had the highest reputation, so Madame promised the clients wouldn't regret it. On this day, the woman received a strange request for adoption. It seemed to Lacey that it was not revenge or treason. She was being asked to be someone's daughter. It was payment for her 10 years of work. It was rather suspicious and tempting, though, because the protagonist still wanted to cover her mother's debts. And if she succeeded in doing so, she would be done with the role. In the end, Lacey would be free. For the next 6 years, her goal was clear: to make Prince I the most powerful heir to the throne. And her client, and now father, would poke the noble lady with his finger and make her the prince's bride. That's when this body would disappear. First, there was no one in Weldon who knew her, because Veronica appeared very suddenly. The prince even wanted to sing a song together. Everything was going according to plan, and now the girl promised to make him king. except that there was an unexpected competitor. The Count got a girl of angelic appearance out of nowhere. And then the prince stopped falling for the charms of Lacey, who was blinded by jealousy. She wished to poison the girl, after which society called her the cruelest woman of all time. The plan failed, and the threat to the prince's life was a source of trouble. The Count was upset that he had raised his own wrongly, and even though he had status, there was nothing he could do about it. It was left up to the law. It seemed that the story was over, but Lacey was back. Madame should not have worried, because the protagonist was confident in her skills, except that she was already wanted. Lacey has been stabbed in the back, namely by her client father, and it's not clear how it could have happened, because the protagonist even had thoughts that it was she who did something wrong, perhaps by playing around and disrupting the plans of the Count himself. But even so, she disagreed, according to his plan. The first prince endowed with many talents was supposed to rise higher and higher. He had even mapped out his future by picking a bride. But then the villainess, Veronica, appeared saying that the prince would belong to her alone. This is how the happy ending was supposed to be. The status of countess can always be obtained or restored with the help of the groom. Lacey only wanted to pay off her debts and then go to a place where no one knows about her. Then all that would be left would be to enjoy the second act in the play, her own life. The finale would have made her happy, but there was one but. The girl did everything as commanded, except that something went wrong. And yes, 5 years of trouble gave her a reward of only 10 million gold. Madame thought that because she was too into the role, that might have scared the Count. In any case, this lady could get double the reward if she gave up Lacey, except that the protagonist still had debts, and now they could get rid of her like garbage. Of course, it was unfair, but the red-haired fury only wanted to save her own skin. Now all Lacey had to do was walk to the port. She was being released thanks to a deep bond, but someday she would still have to answer for her deeds. And afterward, at this very port, they began to hunt her down, wanting her 10 million gold. Lacey was able to disguise herself with magic thanks to Madame's mercy, but children know no pity. They tried their best to intimidate her by promising to spend her bounty wisely. After all, the men were still willing to hand her over to execution. The Count had put out an ab on her to keep his name pure. There was nowhere to run. She still wouldn't admit her guilt, and the client was so displeased that he put a bounty on her head. Freedom was almost in Lacey's hands, so it was too soon to give up. She was helped by a sudden rainstorm, which confused her pursuers into thinking she had jumped into the water. However, the heroine turned out to be much smarter, and it almost stopped dripping. She was lucky, but she lost all her belongings. It didn't take long, but this is the ship Madame had in mind. As long as no one recognized her, except that her presence had not gone unnoticed, and now she was wanted, and the stowaway inside the cabin was greeted very warmly. 2 years ago, a delegation from the Irina Empire was staying, so Lacey's client had asked her to be prepared. In particular, the girl would have to take care of Prince Halid, the delegation's representative. Once again, the Count grumbled at his flawless daughter. Her father worried too much, as if she had once disappointed him. It should have been made clear at once, because the man was interested in a good relationship with the prince. The delegation would have to bring things from the west, so the Earl couldn't miss the opportunity. Even though Lacey was clever, she should not let her guard down, for the prince was not an easy opponent. Rumors began to circulate in high society that the ship was covered in gold and the delegation numbered 100 people. A miracle did occur that day. The mere appearance alone captivated everyone. Prince Halid captivated everyone, but only Lacey was set on a plan. All she had to do was to fail the request. And while she was in the clouds, a man came closer to her and called her a dog. So, who'd have thought that 2 years later they'd meet again, but on a ship? Halid was glad to meet Veronica that even trying to hide this fact was useless for her. Now she realized whose ship it was. Her body trembled at such a blatant mistake, but the prince continued to press and ask questions. It was getting dangerous, but it was worth a try. Lacey cupped his neck with her hands to use the paralyzing poison under her fingernails. Halid intercepted her brushes, making her think she'd been figured out. Well, he'd asked for it. Using her charms, the protagonist pulled the man to the couch in a dance of kissing as the guards entered the room. Halid, however, did not give her a head start and played along perfectly. Somehow, it seemed so natural. And even his reaction was a turn-on. The guards blushed at the embarrassing scene, but were glad that the gentleman was all right. Simone explained that if what they had seen was true, they needed to leave quickly because meeting a mutant was an unprecedented occurrence. However, they would have to wait before reporting it, as the prince was a bit busy. Though just a second later, His Highness came out of his quarters and ordered them to stop searching and hurry up and set sail. The authority was now entrusted to Simone. Lacey, on the other hand, was being as cautious as possible. Even her appearance alone said that she had been through something terrible. A cunning plan to create sympathy appeared in her mind. She made a guilty grimace and said in her defense that she had messed up the ship. Halid didn't believe her game though, because he already knew that his guest was a stowaway hiding from the wanted. She need not deceive the prince, for he and Veronica knew each other well. It was hard to forget their first meeting, especially when a man calls a girl a dog. Lacey hasn't gone off script, but if she keeps getting pissed off like this, she's going to have a hard time holding back. Halid wasn't used to such words yet. I think he confused the word with puppy. Veronica snickered, admiring the man's superior vocabulary, who didn't even need a translator. But he should be more perceptive. She'd gotten so worked up that even the prince had intervened in their quarrel. Halid trembled at her accusations, but then another heroine appeared. The one with the angelic appearance. She said, as if the others hadn't seen her, that there had been a misunderstanding between them. Fortunately, the negotiation was completed. The Count alone thought Lacey's position was correct in treating Naled as an enemy. If he were to give his preference to her, it would be the best outcome. Even though the first impression wasn't great, the game turned out to be excellent. Veronica drew the attention of both of them with the click of her heels and announced that the barbarian wrapped in gold remained a barbarian. It was as if the man couldn't find clothes out of all his gold, or he just liked naughty things. If Lacey had known they were in the rub again. And after such a long time, Halid wouldn't call her a silent person. Her hands reached for the gorgeous earrings, causing the magic to now disappear. The magical item left a trace of magic. And because of her burden, the protagonist pretended to be Veronica. She tried to hide, but magically, the prince recognized her identity and the ability of the jewelry. How did he do it? Now Halid only wished to know her true intentions. Was she a night thief or just running away? Previously, she had been loyal to her master like a dog. And, frowning, he mouthed the name Daniel Le Pen Weatherline, which belonged to the first prince. It was advantageous to him since the one for whose head the bounty was placed boarded the ship. Because of her service to the prince, Veronica threw herself into the hellfire, which seemed like a no-brainer for her. Her acting is truly superb. Halid was mistaken, because his guest was only acting in her own best interest. However, he saw through her pretense, so he won't listen anymore, except which role is more interesting. All he had to do was make a choice, and Lacey would fulfill it. The prince laughed at her words, as if her hanging on to Daniel was not a game. Except it was the truth, the guarantor of which she couldn't tell. It sounded like Halid was trying to poach her. The heroine wouldn't lie though, and added that payment was very important to her. Gathering his thoughts, the man rarely took a sip and explained that in the middle of the desert, in his empire, there was a beautiful city where there were rooms of gold and silver and even sapphires and rubies. She would be allowed to choose anyone. Lacey played the villain perfectly, so the role of the bride will seem much easier for her. Namely, the maid he fell in love with at first sight. But if she didn't like being a maid, she could be a stowaway. If there was difficulty in choosing, Again, Lacey could try to escape. Yes, and he liked the method. Especially when the girl put her arms around his neck like this and then kissed him. She could play anything, so after a short pause, the actress gave her answer. Let their journey begin. The ship was returning to Irina, which was rather sudden. Simone, on the other hand, thought there was no reason to delay, for the prince had found what he had been looking for a long time. The goal at Weldon had been reached. Something was stopping the soldier, after all. He couldn't find his missing sister in this place. Of course, his reaction said otherwise, but the man thought the trip was fun. There was something else. Lana caught a spy. It appeared that he was after them for Irina himself. Moreover, the spy dared to try to seduce His Highness. Except it wasn't a good move, since the prince wouldn't even look at women. Lacey had been suspicious since yesterday. She hadn't signed the contract yet, so this was overkill. There was so much food put in front of her that made the girl fearful about the presence of poison. Although, one could taste a little of it. And it was delicious. Questions rang out in her mind. Why hadn't he set sail, as if waiting for Lacey to come aboard? Was there some other reason for leaving the kingdom so hastily? And why had the diplomats shown no respect? Halid appeared suddenly, hoping she was enjoying her meal. By the way, she needn't have worried about that. Lacey invited him to join as she waited for the conversation. She needed the truth before signing the contract. Was the man across from her hiding something? The prince denied it, but that was only a small part of it, because from the beginning his target had been her. Halid had not intended to sail away so quickly, but what he had sought had come to him. So now there was no need for further hesitation. But now, already Lacey was tensing up, as the man was related to the actor in Fiore. The reason why he recognized Veronica and treated her without hostility, the reason why he trusted the assignments without even checking the abilities. Now, she understood a little. Halid wanted the actress who played the villainess Veronica. However, how could he not recognize her? Among the Fiore children, she was the only one who had received a magic item from Madame, and it was a secret. Madame had sold it, because it could no longer be used at Weldon. Was her acting really good? Lacey bowed her head in chagrin, and even asked how much it had cost her. Halid, on the other hand, was either playing dumb or really didn't realize what he'd done. The protagonist had priced herself dearly, though. She made it to the port sooner than she expected. Despite getting out as discreetly as possible, she was immediately chased as if she had been nudged. Now it was clear. They were luring her onto the ship. The prince felt a little awkward, which Lacey began to object to. They called it being tricked in Weldon. The man was confused at all, since they were talking about different things. The girl understood, figuring he was sending her to be more polite. However, a professional like her could see right through that. Even the kiss was followed by an instant reaction. A person with a developed sixth sense. Halid didn't mind when someone took the initiative, but he still didn't give up his superiority. So why was he so good? Lacey made sure the man lusted for her, so she could take advantage of it. He was amused by her resistance to answering questions, but they should have gone back to discussing the contract, and she shouldn't have given in to her emotions. It was only a formality since Halid had hired her, which meant their partnership had now begun. Simone, however, was clearly enraged by this contact. After all, Crown Princess was more than just words. In the future, she and Halid would work together to protect the peace and quiet of the Irina Empire. Then where would this alliance end? Would he let Lacey go? The prince did not wish that, but asked his aide to speak more quietly, away even if the girl did not know their language. Halid agreed with her words. He didn't know the details, but it looked like she was an actress, which meant she could play absolutely any role. Of course, it was very interesting, but Simone was curious as to how the prince had agreed to it in the first place. However, he was curious himself. The man couldn't understand what was in her head, so he went for it. Either way, it had to do with his purpose. It was time to pick on and tell the Crown Princess, and his right-hand man could be offered a solution to the problem. Khalid was forbidden to talk about the fact that they had already met 10 years ago and made a promise to each other. Lacey was worried about the rightness of her choice. And now she was beginning to realize how far away Irina was. Since crossing the sea was very dangerous for the people of Weldon, Irina was a place that was hard to get to, and even the Count was cowering since the actress dared to disappear without his permission. And Madame stopped taking new orders, instead offering something more interesting. Perhaps that would be better for Lacey? At least no one would find her, and she would have a wonderful life. But of all the roles, why did she get the bride? Even that was given to her with difficulty because of the vivid emotions. For example, from the memories of last night. Moreover, why did he suddenly need a bride? Simone suggested his master tell the girl about something in a couple of days, but Khalid considered it useless. In 3 days, they would reach neutral waters, so the ban would no longer apply. Except that Lacey didn't even remember him, so if the man told her what had happened 10 years ago, she would hate him. That was probably why he looked upset, and why Simone wished he could do something about it. But the prince had already thought of something. He wanted to seduce her and make the girl stay with him after the end of the contract. Even his assistant was surprised at such vulgar language. Now that would not be an easy task, because Lacey was not simple. However, this was already the responsibility of Simone, who did not understand His Highness at all. Not to mention, it was the first time he had seen him so troubled. Khalid even asked for advice on whether he should have walked in front of her in clothes or naked. Lacey even looked like she liked bossy men, but she might actually prefer more modest ones. He didn't look like himself at all. Surely he wasn't possessed by a demon. If Khalid acted like that, it would only scare the crown princess away. However, Simone wasn't sure, so the prince only sighed heavily, especially since he was destroying his ideas of seducing the protagonist. Lacey had been through a lot, so the man regretted not being able to erase her sad past. There was no point in that though, because they could build a future together. Even if she didn't remember the promise, even if she never remembered what they had talked about, Khalid would never leave her again. He would make sure she enjoyed all the delights of life, whether it was food, expensive clothes, or jewelry. After all, Lacey is his fiancée. Except there was another side to it. One that was against their happiness. And these people wished to pierce a lonely man's heart with loneliness. In her dreams, Lacey had nightmares. And just as she was awakening, there was a knock at her door. As it turned out, she had been put on guard while the prince was taking a bath. It was just in time, for she would be able to do some preliminary research. The girl gave him a radiant smile and asked permission to ask him a few questions. A favorable answer was heard, so it didn't take long for Lacey to ask. Compared to Weldon, what was the social status of the women in Irina? The man explained that the couple consulted about the family name when they married, and often the woman became the head of the family. However, he did not know if the prince's consort would be entrusted with public affairs, or if she did diplomatic work at all. This made him blush, embarrassed by his ignorance. Khalid visited her after a while. Lacey called him closer to end the negotiations, but for some reason the prince was tense. The same could be said for her, for the girl believed that Irina was supposed to have contracts. According to the contract, the parties were obliged to faithfully fulfill the role of lovers at first sight. Secondly, Party A protects Party B from revealing their identity in the Weldon Kingdom. Then, the former not only prevents Party B's necessary information, but also provides support. Fourth, upon successful completion of the task, Party B is paid a reward of 10 million gold in cash or written statement. Fifth, after completion, Party A no longer seeks Party B. And last, the actions of the contract must be precise. But for some reason, there was nothing here about what would happen if it failed. Lacey agreed to make it clear, though she tried to leave it out. She wrote in the 7th clause that if the assignment failed, but Party A could ask anything they wanted from the contractor as compensation. He seemed to like that. Even if the contract was going to be long, Lacey hoped it wouldn't last longer than 2 years, because that risked a stab in the back. Khalid thought she was exhausted from multiple contracts, but the girl was sure that 2 years was too long and might raise suspicion because they wouldn't have children. The prince clearly wasn't expecting such a response. However, Lacey thought that having birth control would be a good idea because she refused to have unprotected liaisons. His Highness gave no answer, but only wanted to hurry up and sign this contract. Now that they are together, can they do everything that normal couples do? She had the power to do anything with that piece of paper, just like he had with her. It didn't last long for this fun, because the protagonist deserved to be heard before they started. She was very tired, so Khalid had only to enjoy her sleeping form. Lana, on the other hand, begged in every possible way and even kneeled at Simone's feet to meet the crown prince's consort. She had been refused several times and this time too, but now the twin brother had already stepped in. The frontierswoman wanted to meet this girl and gain her favor, which wasn't even surprising to the others. After all, she was the best at catching mutants. Lana had fought in the attack on Sarajev, so the prince trusted her. By the way, this desire had occurred to others as well, but it took a special occasion to meet her. There were already those who had received her favor. Sana explained that he, born into a poor family and tried to gain the favor of the imperial family through service, so they would definitely correct their behavior. Simone personally promoted him, so asked him not to be cruel. Meanwhile, Lacey refreshed herself in the imperial bath that even the poison from under her fingernails was washed away. Khalid was already aware of her difficult journey and he was glad she was relieved. Though the protagonist was angered by the behavior of the maids who spoke a common language that made her unable to understand their speech. But they cared for her so much that it was like heaven. One of them said that they liked the appearance of the prince's consort, and that was the reason for the uproar. And the man himself appeared very suddenly. As he said, Lacey would get everything she needed, but she said that things were moving too fast. Khalid took advantage of her good mood and leaned over her confused face. The prince wanted to apologize for last night, especially since they hadn't been able to get some things done because of her wanting to sleep. Lacey, on the other hand, said she still wasn't ready, however he saw otherwise. It was just the two of them in the room, but it was getting harder and harder for the man to wait. Suddenly, she noticed something in the corner that made her start to shiver. It showed the tail of an animal that Lacey had seen for the first time. A tigress. Unlike Weldon, there was still magic in Irina, and every inhabitant had abilities. When abilities are perfected, you can make protective images called Teru. The world abroad could not show Teru to anyone, however Zeppi would not harm her. But now it was necessary to finish what he had started, something Khalid was very eager for. However, it seemed to the protagonist that she didn't want to, but that wasn't the case. The stranger's hands were so gentle that her heart was pounding fast, and the kisses were so sweet, but there was one problem. Lacey could only close her eyes and play lover, but not make love, because she didn't know how. Sometime in the past, it had been explained to her and the other girls that their main mission was to act. To truly act. To truly act, you had to put your soul into it, and that was hard. They might even get their hearts broken, but they weren't supposed to let that happen. So currently, the protagonist was resisting as she refused to make unprotected liaisons. However, Khalid proved to be prepared. It was about the bracelets. Even if a girl only wore one, she wouldn't be able to conceive children, and she wore as many as 3 and said she was going to the bathroom, which he thought was a hint. That explained the maid's reaction. Lacey couldn't even dream that the bracelets were magical birth control items. Khalid picked her up in his arms, deciding that the girl would be more willing on the bed. But she saw fit to add another clause to the contract, namely, there would be no gratuitous sexual intercourse. After all, they were only playing an inseparable couple, which meant they didn't need to be a couple for real. It was obvious. Even though Khalid was not happy, he still agreed to her wishes, and now all that was left was to sign and choose a name for her, because her real name was kept secret. That was all that protected her. Nereis. The prince had named her after a nymph who lived in the sea. His smile made the protagonist embarrassed, causing something to tighten in her chest.